Hey everyone, we all use money pretty much every day, but have you ever really stopped to think about what it is or where it came from? Well, today we're going to dive into the incredible story of money, all the way from ancient trading to the digital world of today. So let's get into it.
It's a pretty wild idea when you think about it, right? Why do we all just agree that this piece of paper or these numbers on a screen have any value at all? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock way, way back, before cash or credit cards even existed.
All right, so our story starts at the very beginning, with the first ever form of trade, bartering. It seems like the simplest idea in the world, but it turns out it had a huge flaw.
So picture this. In the earliest human communities, you just traded stuff for other stuff. If you're a farmer and you've got way too many apples and you need some new boots, you just find the local bootmaker and swap. Easy, right? Well, what if the bootmaker doesn't want your apples?
And this right here is the fundamental problem with bartering. It's called the double coincidence of wants. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it just means that for a trade to work, you have to want what the other person has, and they have to want what you have, at the exact same time. So if the cobbler is already drowning in apples, well, our farmer is just out of luck. No new boots for him.
So yeah, bartering was inefficient. Society needed a better way, and the very first solution was to find common items that basically everyone agreed were valuable. This new idea was called commodity money. The key thing to understand here is that these objects were useful all by themselves. They had their own built-in value, even if you weren't using them to trade.
And people got really creative with this. Roman soldiers, for instance, were sometimes paid in salt. Fun fact, that's where we get the word salary. Cattle were another popular choice, but, they could get sick and die. Seashells were rare and look nice, but you can't exactly split one in half to make change. And grain? It would spoil. So you can see the issue. While all of these were an improvement, they each had some serious problems.
What the world really needed was something that wouldn't rot or die, something you could easily divide into smaller pieces, and something that wasn't a total pain to carry around. The perfect solution turned out to be metal. Gold and silver were rare, they lasted forever, and you could melt them down into any size you needed.
And this leads us to a huge moment in human history. Around 600 BC, in a kingdom called Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey, they minted the world's first official coins. They even stamped them with a little picture, like a lion, to guarantee their weight and purity. This was an absolute game-changer.
Now, coins were a brilliant invention, but they still had one big issue. They were heavy. If you were a rich merchant, lugging around giant bags of gold was not only inconvenient, it was also dangerous. It was time for another breakthrough.
And that breakthrough came from China, more than 1,000 years ago. Merchants there started leaving their heavy coins with a trusted person for safekeeping. In return, they got a paper receipt. Before long, people realized it was way, way easier to just trade the receipts themselves instead of the actual heavy metal. And just like that, paper money was born. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. We went from simply trading things to using standardized metal coins to using paper notes. But pay attention to those last two dates on the timeline, because this is where the very idea of what gives money its value gets turned completely upside down.
You see, for a long time, paper money was basically just an IOU for something physical, like gold. It was a promise. But what happens when that promise isn't about gold anymore, but about simple trust?
For much of modern history, this promise was made official through something called the gold standard. This meant that a country guaranteed that you could, in theory, walk into a bank with your paper money and exchange it for a specific amount of real, physical gold. It kept the value of money tied to something tangible.
But in the 20th century, most countries moved away from that system. Today, we use what's called fiat money. Now, fiat is just a fancy way of saying, because I said so. Fiat money has value simply because the government declares it does, and we all trust that it does. The big plus is that it gives governments more flexibility to manage the economy. The big risk? Its value depends completely on that trust staying strong. This huge shift from money backed by a physical thing to money backed by an idea is what paved the way for the next giant leap, taking the physical part out of the picture almost completely. Money was about to become pure information.
And this move away from cash didn't happen all at once. It happened in stages. First came checks, which are basically just written instructions you send to your bank. Then we got plastic cards that sent those instructions electronically. And now, for many of us, it's all on our phones in a digital wallet, sending those instructions wirelessly.
When credit cards first popped up in the 1950s, they totally changed everything.
For the first time, people could buy things without having the actual cash on them right at that moment. It completely transformed the way people shop and spend.
And today, money is almost entirely digital. Think about it. You can pay your bills online, instantly send a friend money for lunch, get your paycheck deposited straight into your account, all without ever touching a coin or a bill. In fact, most of the money in the entire world exists only as data on a computer.
So, we've come from apples to metal atoms to digital bits. It's been an incredible evolution. But the story isn't over, not by a long shot. So, what comes next?
To understand the future, we have to talk about a technology called the blockchain. The simplest way to think about it is like a digital record book that's shared with thousands of people. When a new transaction happens, it's added to everyone's book at the same time. This makes the record super secure and almost impossible to tamper with.
And this is the technology that made Bitcoin possible. When it was created back in 2009, it was the world's very first cryptocurrency. But the most revolutionary thing about it is that it's decentralized. That means there's no single bank or government in charge. It's a whole new type of money created for the internet.
And Bitcoin really blew the doors open to all kinds of new ideas. Will governments start creating their own official digital currencies? Will we soon be paying for things with just our fingerprint or a scan of our face? What kind of money will we use in virtual reality or online games?
And that's really the big question that this whole story leads to. We've seen money go from a physical object you could touch to a piece of paper that was a promise to nothing more than a number on a screen. The question for all of us is, what comes next? In the future, will money be something you can hold, or will it just be code that you control? Thanks so much for joining me.